Before we get into today's video, I just wanted to make a quick disclaimer. This is not a guide for how to fly through thunderstorms or how to fly a plane or how to do any of the things that you're seeing me doing. I'm just sharing my experiences with you and hoping you can learn from an experience that I learned a lot from. Thank you for your understanding, and I hope you enjoy. Hello random viewers and welcome to another video. Today you join me in an airplane. At this point I am pretty close to getting my instrument rating, so I wanted to take up some relatives who were visiting to show them what it's like. But this is the flight, as you can see from the title of this video, that I'm probably the least proud of, and we will get to that in a moment. But firstly, we flooded the engine, of course, so I had to pull the mixture back out. Then, the engine roars to life finally. If you caught that, we pilots like to joke that our propeller is our air conditioning. It propels a large volume of air, so when you do open the windows you get a lot of airflow, and it does help cool things down on a very hot day like today was. Today seemed pretty uneventful. I looked at the weather. One of the weather reports we look at is called the Terminal Aerodrome Forecast, or TAF for short. This forecast predicted thunderstorms in the vicinity of this airport around 1400 local time, so that's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At this point it was about 12, and of course I transposed something and thought that the thunderstorms were not due until 4 in the afternoon. To further complicate matters, there was no convective sigma outlook. You can see that there is an outlook area, that yellow there on my iPad, but it was a rather small area, so it really wasn't that big a concern. Further, there were other forecasts that aren't to be used for primary weather decisions, but to support the forecast that I can see, and they did not predict any thunderstorms. So I saw a very slight chance, is what was in my mind, and that was good enough for me. That was one of the first choices that I soon came to regret.
Clear, temperature 29, dew point 19, or altimeter 3012, landing departed runway 1, expect visual approach. VFR departures, advise direction of flight, VFR departures, requesting flight following, say destination, altitude en route. Advise on initial contact, you have information X-ray. Information X-ray time 1553 Zulu 1 variable with 3 visibility 10 sky condition clear.
What you just heard right there is weather that is specific to an airport. It's transmitted once every hour by the controllers. It's called an ATIS, and it's something that we listen to try to get an idea of the weather. Everything looked good there, so then I began to taxi and test the brakes and making sure that everything worked exactly how I wanted it to in this workhorse of a Cessna 172. From here, I proceeded to the edge of the taxiway, got taxi clearance, got to the runway, did the run-up on the engine, which is where we spool it up to pretty close to full power, test it out, make sure that everything works on the engine the way that we want it to. You don't want an engine failing right on takeoff. That is the most critical time that could happen, because you have almost zero options. There are options, but they're not necessarily very good ones, so we want to make sure that engine's going to work for us. Once the run-up was completed, I moved the plane over to the runway and called the tower to request clearance for takeoff. You will hear that here in a second.
Greenville Tower, 9605 Quebec, Alpha 1 for runway 1, ready for departure.
9605 Quebec, we are downtown tower, runway 1 clear for takeoff, proceed on course westbound and maintain VFR.
Clear for takeoff, runway 1, maintain VFR, 9605 Quebec. Alright, let's close these windows. We'll do that. That's on. Landing light comes on, that light comes off. Those come on, and transponder is how I want it. Very good. There you go, you got it. Don't rotate that too far down or it'll come open again.
I saw that it was still halfway open.
I have that problem a lot, and I'm
hit it again.
looking for airplanes that he might not be talking to. I don't see any. So you guys ready?
Yep. Yes, sir.
All right. Do you want to do it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you want to do it? Do you want to push that throttle all the way forward? It's that knob.
That way?
All the way forward, yep. Gently, but all the way.
All the way.
A little faster. There you go. Just like that.
All the way?
All the way. We want to get into the air. There you go. Very good. All right, here comes 40 knots. When we hit 55, we'll start turning. There's 50, 55, rotating.
Where'd you say that?
Now you may disagree with that decision to let one of my passengers advance the throttle, but under supervision, and if you are comfortable doing it, it can give them a great experience. One of the cures for air sickness that is actually very well known is letting your passengers take the controls, because in bad turbulence, when you're in control, it really does help. So it's completely legal to have a passenger take the controls, you just don't want to give them anything they can't handle because they're not a rated pilot, and I'm not a certified instructor. So, advancing the throttle, that's something that's very easy. I can watch it. They did it gently. I trusted this person, so it's done right. As you can see, we made it into the air safely, and we began our westbound trip. I was going to take them into the mountains to show them some of the nice areas that we have there. The Appalachian Mountains are very neat to look at from the sky, but we started to encounter some thunderstorms, and I'll start discussing that as we get into them.
Yeah, we can't go in a straight line. What we have to do is go around this massive storm. I don't want to go under it or close to it. We're going around that one right there. We're going to go just to the west of it and then circle back around.
Here what I'm doing is I'm explaining to my passengers what I'm thinking about doing. I wanted to take them to Jackson County, which is in North Carolina. That's a very neat airport. It has almost cliffs on all sides, so it's a really fun landing, and it's a great place to show people. But the weather was not looking good. There were large thunderstorm cells between there and us, so I eventually decided to take them to a different airport, but of course I'm keeping them updated along the way. Some pilots and passengers may disagree with that, and I think it depends on the situation. Some people don't want to know the details, they just want to enjoy the flight. These people, in particular, loved it. They wanted to know all the details, so I gave them all the information they could want, and they knew what I had in mind every step of the way. There was no confusion there. Now, seeing thunderstorms building off to our right would normally be a huge cause for concern, but we're bordering the Appalachian Mountains. It's very common to have afternoon thunderstorms, especially this time of year when it's hot and humid. So it really wasn't a cause for concern for me. I thought it was just an isolated mountain thing. That's what the convective segment outlook reflected as well. So, again, no cause for concern yet. Just the fact that I'm going to have to go around it, or maybe take them to a different airport. We now skip ahead to about 30 minutes in the future, and we're looking to land at Western Carolina Airport. It's to the far west of the mountains, far away from the storms. I'd given them a nice wide berth to stay as far away from this as possible. Did not want to mess with thunderstorms. I never intended to mess with them, nor did I want to. But at this point, I ran into the next large decision that I had overlooked that I seriously should not have. One of the things that we're taught in flight school is you have to assess yourself. You have to make sure that you, as a pilot, are ready to fly a plane. That is mentally, physically, all of those things. It is a massive responsibility. One of the things we cover is physiological factors, such as pressure changes. And one of those big examples that they love to give is allergies. If you're having seasonal allergies, this is the spring, it might not be a good idea to fly. You can have issues with adapting to the pressure changes because these are not pressurized aircraft. The air gets thinner as you go up and then it gets thicker as you go down, and that can cause a lot of problems if you're having sinus difficulties. Now, of course, I did this check for myself. Second nature, doesn't really bother me. But what I failed to do was to check my passengers, or at least ask them if they were having any problems. Unfortunately for the relative in the back seat, who you cannot see in this video, she was having some considerable sinus issues, and as we began to descend, we had no problems climbing, but descending caused a blockage, and that can be extremely painful. And it took me a good while to realize, but I eventually came to the conclusion we were not going to land at this airport, and we needed to turn back and go back to Greenville and begin descending as slowly as possible, because sooner or later we'd have to land. We needed to make that process as gentle as possible for that backseat passenger, because now I realize the severity of the situation. First I tried a few circles just to slowly come down, but nothing was really working, so this is when I decided to go back and try to maintain altitude as much as possible. So there were a few points I had to fly to the side of some mountains, getting pretty close to them. One thing to remember, if you're flying between two mountains or through a valley, never fly down the center. It's a bad idea. You want to fly pretty close to one side. That way, if something goes wrong, you have the space to make a 180-degree turn and get back out. So that's the rule you want to adhere to. Stay close on one side, leave yourself plenty of room on the other. And that's what we began to do after we made this decision.
There's rain, right there.
Is it at the storms over there?
No.
No?
Carburetor heat on.
We've now jumped ahead even more, and I encountered a small area of rain. It wasn't really a thunderstorm, but what I did have to do is turn on the carburetor heat. These older planes have carburetors. They're designed for, of course, controlling how much air and fuel go into the engine. But one of the big problems on the Cessna 172 is carburetor icing. So when you see visible moisture, even though it's a hot day, it gets very cold in that carburetor. We want to pull that carburetor heat on, which feeds hot air into the carburetor, and that ensures it doesn't ice over, and we lose our engine. Flying this low in the mountains, you definitely don't want an engine failure. It is legal what we're doing, but as always, you want to take precautions. Making it out of the mountains, I thought we were in the clear. We were out of the areas with the sloping terrain that helps facilitate thunderstorm growth. But to my disappointment, I found a massive thunderstorm had just formed over the airport that I had departed from, Greenville downtown, and that was a problem. I had no intentions of going near this thunderstorm, but I did have a time limit and I had to have the plane back. This is where my decisions are not necessarily wrong, but probably not the best ones. I just passed a perfectly good airport, Pickens County. It was clear, there was no weather over it. In hindsight, I should have landed there and waited for the storm to clear out over Greenville. The person who had the plane reserved after me had no business flying on this day with a storm looming over the airport, so I really should not have been worried about having it back to them in time. But then again, I was also worried about my passenger. I didn't want to have to subject them to 2 takeoffs and landings. So there was a lot of strange things to deal with. Another interesting fact about this day is that there was no wind. The storms were not moving, they were just kind of all sitting wherever they had formed. And this detail is critical, because in normal situations with a moving, developing thunderstorm, absolutely not. However, this one was sitting still over Greenville and not doing anything. So I made the decision to go ahead and call the tower at Greenville and ask them about the weather conditions, and try to determine if landing at Greenville, even though the storm was very close to it, would be a good idea.
I'm seeing a lot of storms over your area, and I'm trying to get inbound and land full stopped, but I'm curious if it's safe to do that with all those storms.
605 Quebec Tower, we do have clouds over the field, and they are about 2 miles to the east of the field, with the majority of the most dangerous part of the storm to the east of the field, about 2 miles.
How bad are the winds there? Are they still pretty calm?
Right now, 080 at 6.
080 at 6. All right, I appreciate that information. I'll be inbound then on Zulu. I'm probably over by the racetrack, kind of over by Pickens.
After calling the tower, it was just as I suspected. The storm was sitting, not moving, wind was still very calm, and the fact that the wind was calm at Greenville told me that the storm wasn't doing a whole lot at the airport, and this led me to believe that it would be safe enough to attempt a landing. The other massive thing contributing is that I saw 2 or 3 other aircraft also landing, and I knew that if something went wrong with them, I'd be very much aware, so I made the decision to go ahead. You saw there I accidentally had him turned down, so I had to turn up the volume knob so that I could actually hear the controller, but we relayed the information, we got everything set up, and of course my phraseology is not perfect here. I was just trying to get some information, and the controller was very helpful with that. Jumping forward a few more minutes, you can finally see some of that storm. You can see the rain coming down. Unfortunately, I only have the one GoPro, and this is the best angle I have. There was already a mount in the aircraft, so this is the one I picked. In the future, I'd love to have other cameras to be able to show you more, maybe straight out the front window or off to the side. That would all be great, but this was the best I could do. Here, I was told I would be number 3 for the airport, which means there were 2 aircraft in front of me, and I needed to follow them in. I did not like that. I did not want anything to do with that. I wanted to get on the ground now, but I get it. Other people need to go, they got in first. Further, it provides me people to watch. If anything happens to them, I'm turning around and getting out of there. So all of this contributed to make the decision to go ahead with the landing.
Turn eastbound for a base. It should be good. Out of turn, it'll be 12 o'clock in about a mile and a half.
Traffic in sight, 965 Quebec, following them in.
05 Quebec Tower, following aircraft. You are number 2. Preceding aircraft's also a full stop. Runway 1 clear to land. Number 2.
Number 2 cleared to land, runway 1, 9605 Quebec.
So the exchange was pretty self-explanatory. The controller wants me to see the aircraft in front of me and follow them for the landing, and of course I was given clearance to land on the runway. Now at this point I was getting very close to the storm. I was paying attention to everything, every detail. In the situation this seemed like the best choice, and so I took it.
Now 110 at 18 gusting 24.
This was where things were getting serious. That gusting 24 means that the wind was gusting to 24 knots, or around 26, 27 miles per hour. That is pretty strong. That's a very large change from the previous 6 knots. And so I knew the storm was starting to do things.
That is right where we're going. That lightning struck that car lot.
This was where I saw lightning very close to our position, about half a mile away. Clearly very far from ideal, and really should have turned around. The GoPro was not able to capture that. It might come through on a higher resolution, I'm not really sure. Between the propeller and being off to the side, I doubt it was picked up. But I assure you it was there. It was a very real discharge of an absurd amount of electricity, and I did not want one hitting the plane. And so this is why I decided to make the approach for landing at VY, which is a very fast speed, about 95 knots for this aircraft. It decreases chances of damage and the chances of a stall. So it's a guaranteed sloppy, horrible landing because it's way too fast, but with gusts of wind, the storm starting to do things, I decided this was the safest option.
Oh, here.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I guess that lightning was right there.
710 Tower, we need a park. Southeast ramp, please. Sir, right turn, Bravo 4, contact ground, point 25.
Alright. Get ready. It's gonna get bad. Don't hold on to that door handle, but...
Traffic, you are cleared to land, runway 1, number 2. Runway 1, number 2, cleared to land, cap 3903, thank you.
Here comes the gusts. Alright, we made the runway. Okay. This is going to be a very long landing.
Tower, A51 Roman Golf is running holding short 1. A51 Roman Golf Tower, runway 1, hold short. Hold short 1. I want Roman Golf.
Walker, you're...
I'm bringing it down as slowly as possible. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. You have to...
There we go.
down. Actually, those gusts weren't that bad.
Maple turn left to Alpha 7 and contact ground point 25. Nice job.
Left an alpha, sorry for the show, but I appreciate it. Contact ground 121.25.
As you can see there, even the controller commented at the absolute skill and grace of my landing. No, it was awful. But you can see other aircraft waiting to take off. I don't know what they were doing. There was another guy landing behind me. I wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted out. I guess it means I wasn't completely insane if a bunch of other people were doing it as well, so. But if anyone wants to challenge my decisions, you're gonna have to challenge a lot of other people's too. You can see there how I bounced a few times. That is called porpoising. What happened is the front wheel hit first, and the plane began to bounce. And those will increase in intensity, and the procedure is to stop and go around, which of course I did not want to do, but I realized I had no choice, so I started to give it full power, but somehow, due to timing, or who knows what, it was just perfect that as I added that bit of power, I realized I was perfectly on the ground. So I pulled back that power and came to a stop as quickly as possible, and taxied back to the ramp. Thank you so much for watching. I will reiterate my point from the beginning. This is not a guide for how to fly through a thunderstorm. Don't fly through thunderstorms. Don't go near them. It is not worth it. Don't do this. There were a lot of bizarre and different circumstances this particular day, and they all added up to my choices to make decisions that I might not otherwise have done, but in the end I think things turned out pretty well. This was also a fantastic learning experience, and that's why I'm sharing this with you. It might not have been the right decision to make this flight, or to try to land at this airport. I maybe should have waited. There were a lot of things I could have or should have done that in hindsight would have made more sense, but I didn't. And do I regret what I did? In some places, yes, but I got a good experience out of it, and I hope you all can learn from that too. And that's the point of it. There's no reason for me to keep this to myself. Learn from this in whatever you do. You might have hard set rules. I mean, before this, I had decided I never wanted to mess with a thunderstorm, but that's what I ended up doing this day. In the right circumstances, strange things can happen. So I think anyone can learn from that, whether a pilot or in any other profession. I'm not sharing this to scare you away from aviation if it's something that you would enjoy, but it's something to be aware of. Weather is unpredictable, and we deal with weather. There are other unpredictable things in other careers, and you need to be ready for them. Do your homework, check with your passengers, check the weather, but be ready for anything, because sometimes anything can happen. Sometimes you just have those bizarre days where things line up in very strange ways to make you do things you might not otherwise have done. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for your understanding. If not, thank you for the suggestion, and I hope you all have a very nice day.